Hello there, my name is Leonard Paul. I run the School of Video Game Audio. You can check us out at sovga.com. And this is my AirCon 24 talk. So it's visual scripting for game audio. And yeah, I've been running the school since 2012, and we teach people how to work within Unreal, Wise, Pure Data, Unity, Fmod, and yeah, we've had the fortune of having, I guess, hundreds of students from, yeah, like over 60 different countries join us from around the world. And we do try to, you know, get as many people from different places, because that was the reason of doing the school, is to try and reach out to places that might not necessarily have access to learning sort of advanced game audio techniques, or even just like general game audio techniques. So yeah, in this talk, I'll talk about visual scripting for game audio. And the overview here, it'll be, as far as the way that this is all laid out for the talk, I'll start with the history, and throughout, actually, I'll give examples. I'll give some pros and cons, sort of like, advantages and disadvantages. And then also talk about some challenges, because, even when things are, advantages, they might still be kind of challenging to do as well. So I'd like to sort of break that down. And then the future, sort of what some possibilities that I see are for scripting for game audio. Okay, so when I talk about visual scripting, it'll be not just the sort of strict visual scripting side of things, which, if you're really looking at the way that it's defined, if we look at Unreal Engine 5, blueprints would be sort of visual scripting, right? So, and that system here in the top right, that is sort of tied to the frame rate of the game. And it's sort of more where you do the logic and behaviors. But if you're working in game audio, you'll also use metasounds in Unreal Engine 5. Okay, so this is a DSP, or digital signal processing graph, and that runs at the sampling rate of the system. Usually that's 48,000 samples per second. And here we've got these little pink lines here, and that shows where the audio flows through the patch itself. When we look at the pure data patches, the way to sort of see the difference between there, because it's all black and white, at least strictly PD is, that the thin cables will be sort of the control rate messages, and the thick cables will be the audio rate messages. So a brief history. We've got Sketchpad starting out in 1963, and so that's the top, sort of like top left one here. And you actually used a light pen to draw the cables between the different nodes, and connect those together. In 1968, we've got Grail. That's just sort of another thing following after that. And then as far as talking about game audio systems, we've got Electronic Arts Audio Event Management System. That's in the top right here. And that was sort of based off of Generator by Native Instruments, and which became Reactor. So that's sort of a little bit of inspiration there. And same thing in 2008 for EA's Frostbite. But also know that for both of these, they're both control rate message stuff. So they're not, working with audio directly, like the actual audio samples themselves. And same thing for Guerrilla Games, visual scripting in the bottom right here. It's also a similar system. And then Rockstar's AMP, and it is in the bottom left here. And that one, as you can see, like the audio cables are actually moving around there. And going between the different boxes, which is kind of cool. And that's running at, audio rate. The idea was to make it so that it looked kind of fun and interesting to use. And then we'll be looking a lot at Unreal's metasounds. So that is the same thing, works with audio specifically. So as far as my own background, I started using Pure Data, and actually, I guess before that slightly, Max. So that was back in the early 90s, and that's what PD got started, was in the Pure Data got started in the mid 90s as well. It was sort of like it just grew out of Max, and it's an open source version and has always been open source, which is kind of cool. So that means it compiles on pretty much everything, and you can use it for all sorts of different things. So when I was first teaching game audio at the Art Institute in 2001, it's over like 20 years ago now, I really wanted to get a system that would show students and prepare them for actually working in game audio. But the problem was is that back in those days, studios did not use AIMS, or sorry, they did use AIMS, but AIMS was a proprietary set of tools that I couldn't actually show the students. So even though I was able to use that at Electronic Arts, I couldn't show the students that. And there wasn't middleware, sort of the deep tool sets that we have like with Wise and Fmod. And so I had to make my own, and I built it out of pure data. And that's an example here is on the right-hand side with the crowd engine. And yeah, I'll go over a little bit of that in a sec. And so, yeah, when I made my own system in Pure Data, I wrote a Gamma Sutra article in 2003 about it to sort of, tell other people what I was doing and how I was doing it. And in 2004, the Vancouver Film School, I started the game audio program there. I taught there for 5 years. And I used this system throughout, but eventually we were able to get Wise into our course, which was really cool. And we were able to, teach the students about a tool that they could use directly in an actual commercial product. So what this tool did is that it broke down different sort of areas of game audio that were sort of more interactive. So it did adaptive music. I'll show you some of that later on. Sound effects, I'll show you some of that too. The crowd engine stuff, so that's here where similar to using like a blend container in Wise, where you use a parameter to sort of blend and crossfade between multiple sounds. That's what's happening here. So I've got my low sort of crowd sound, medium intensity crowd sound, and then high intensity crowd sound where people are freaking out. They're enjoying the game. And I just use the intensity there to crossfade between those. And that was a very basic crowd engine model that we would use, like in sports games. And then the last example here that I had in this particular tool was stitched speech, and that would sort of go, like player number 1 shoots, they score, something like that, where it's the different chunks of samples and you put those together to save space. Okay. And so with procedural sound design, yeah, let's have a look at SimCell in a sec, but in this case, one of the things that's really powerful about using procedural sound design is that each playback can be different. And yes, you can do this with a pile of samples, but the neat thing is within procedural sound design is that you can actually make those sounds so that they get controlled by parameters and bend them. So if you think of the game as kind of like this thing that's constantly evolving and responding to player input, and you have static, just samples that have been recorded elsewhere and just play back from start to end, then the thing is that they're not going to be able to mold to the curves and changes in the game. So that's a real big advantage of using procedural sound design. It's difficult because, it requires a lot of extra, implementation to get it to work. But the possibilities for it are really cool. And I think you'll get a better idea once I show you. So procedural sound design, you can combine samples, effects, and synthesizers. So synths are synthesizing sound in real time, usually, from mathematics. So like you can think of synths where you play a sawtooth wave or something like that, and you can change the pitch or change the distortion and stuff like that. So the nice thing about using synthesis is that you can have low disk space and it also take up less RAM space usually. But the problem often is that it's sort of high CPU. So what you'll want to do is often balance those kind of concerns between samples and pre-recorded sounds and then like live or generated sounds, synthesized sounds. Okay, let's have a look at that.
So the way that the music changes with response to the game, the different gameplay sort of possibilities through scenes. So here, I can make it sound like you're being attacked by a virus. All right, so we changed to the reverb, violin sound, and it's all scary, right? And it also changes the notes as well. right? Then I can go back again to the original scene. So you can see that it's a smooth transition. All right, so this sort of purple back chunk in the middle here is where the notes get sequenced, and I can change the way that the patches are changed here from the scene changes. So if I look at different, these are the different layers that go out here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? All the notes there. So this one here would go out to instrument number 1. All right, so switching over to the sound design for SimCell, this is an overview of the patch that is used to generate all the sound design, right? All sorts of great stuff there to do with cells. And every single sound has an intensity slider that goes from 0 to 1. From low intensity all the way up to high intensity. So on this one, the high is 1, so it makes the gate open slower. Right? And then intensity 0, faster. Okay, and if we look inside the patch, we can see that basically it's just a noise waveform that gets sort of sampled and held. So in other words, I'm changing like the sampling rate basically, and it goes through a filter here. And the envelope of the filter changes over time. And then I turn this patch off when it's no longer being used to save on CPU. So over here, these are the interface sounds, and I used a 303 to simulate those. So, all right, so I'm just changing patch values, and that's all that's going on. Rollover. So yeah, and that's what it looks like on the inside. It's all the patch changes and stuff.
All right, so yeah, hopefully that gives a better idea of, how this stuff actually works. I hope that demos work well. And you can check out a longer video online, and all the, say like I have that linked. Say if you click on like overview here, then that'll take you to the YouTube video for that. So this talk has all those links embedded in it, which is kind of fun. So it's called the Generative Audio System for SimCell or something like that. Okay. One of the things about SimCell is unfortunately that the CPU was so high because we're making it for high school students that were using these Android tablets, and unfortunately the Android tablets were really underpowered, so I ended up having to flatten all my audio out from like real-time synthesis stuff into just samples. So that's the way it sometimes goes for video games. So sad. All right, and then let's have a look at another example here. This one's a demo that I made to really feature and highlight the use of synthesis. This uses the Tanks Unity demo project, and it has both sound effects and music in it. And this example, you wouldn't necessarily do this with a commercially released game, so I actually have PD running separately from Unity, and then I use Open Sound Control to communicate and talk between the two. And so Open Sound Control is kind of like MIDI, but you can pass all sorts of different messages, and it's sort of more for internal communication, but you can also use it for controllers and stuff like that as well. And the great thing about this project is that you can download the whole thing and experiment with like over 20 different patches on our website. So just go to the top of that and then you can try it out. Let's have a quick listen to that. Okay, so with that, you can see that there's this great way to make the graphics respond to the audio and also have the audio respond to the graphics too. So, although I showed you some music that reacted to the game, in this example, I want to show you sort of an even more in-depth piece that I used for the Beep documentary. So, although this is not a video game example, I wanted to show this because it gives some examples on sort of how you can even use pure data or visual scripting type scenarios for linear media as well. So the neat thing with this one is that every time I play back this particular piece, it'll actually play back differently. And you can also dynamically change the tempo, and you can make it go through the different parts of the score faster. So that allows one to produce different hit points, with a film, say, where they're synced up depending on how the edit changes. Let's have a look. Okay, nice. So yeah, I guess as we're working on this, you can sort of look like, oh my gosh, that's like so much, like boxes and wires, and it'd be great if there was Duolingo for visual coding. I mean, the way that I see it is it's kind of a language. But yeah, there isn't really. And what I tried to do is use large language models and to see if there was a way of using Gemini, ChatGPT, etc. So the thing is that because these models are trained like on text primarily, then usually what you do is when you ask it a question like, how do I create like a 303 synthesizer using pure data, it'll be okay at generating sort of like, a response, giving sort of pseudocode because there's a lot of sort of text examples of people doing the same like in an online forum. But unfortunately, they're not so good at creating, visual scripting code because the way that LLMs work is they're kind of like, like autocomplete, like Uber autocomplete. So it works well with text about trying to figure out what the next word is, but it's not so good at working within a specific like language, like a visual scripting language like PD, even though the source code for the patches are in text. I've tried it, but maybe we could possibly train LLMs, if a specific encoding is used. And one neat thing would be is that if you can use it like, like Copilot, like you can for, Microsoft's Copilot, where you have like an AI that is able to autocomplete your code and give suggestions. Right, and so here we have some PD software examples, and this is automatism here. I'll give a little example of that, but let's first have a look at plug data, and you can download that for free at plugdata.org. Okay, great. And with this, I'm showing how you can use Reaper to host a clap plugin that encapsulates plug data. It just runs similar to like a VST plugin or whatever flavor plugin you want to say, like VST3 or whatever. And the thing that should be fairly easy to do in the future is to just put this into something like Fmod, into UE5. It's actually been proposed to have clap plugins for Unreal Engine 5. Of course, there might be an issue with GUI type stuff, but hopefully they'll figure it out. So I've added a few notes here. And then I have, this is my main plug data window. So this is actually running pure data itself, and it's fully compatible with the vanilla version, meaning that, it's all the functions that are supported by the official version are supported in this. Okay, and so here you can see the MIDI notes from the track are going in. It's like flashing the little MIDI thing, right? And this is all being done interactively. So you can actually add, like I just added a guitar there. Okay. And then we need to get the guitar so that we can actually hear it. All right. And so what I'll do is go over to the input output. And I mean, I could put a DAC there, but I think it's better actually to have more control over the volume. So I decided to put an out. Okay. And if we get rid of the DAC, and now we put the output of the guitar into the output and turn up the sound of the output, okay, then we'll be able to actually hear what the notes are. So there you go. And yes, of course, you can do all this with just using a regular VST plugin, but the thing is that I'm showing you how you can dynamically patch like um, this wouldn't necessarily need to be MIDI. It could be any sort of parameters from the game, right? So you could have a distortion plugin here where it's going to react to, whatever, the intensity of the game or something like that, okay? So if we add that effect, you can even see like, the graphics of the audio going through there, right? Okay, and yeah, like what we'll do is just be able to hear it a little bit. And so, there you are. We're auditioning it in the game, okay? But then we can crank the distortion and then be able to hear, sort of more intensity on that track. And this, would be something that you could do in Wise or Fmod, where you dynamically change an effects send. But, I'm just showing that with the plug data being a plugin, that it is something that we can easily add to an existing software system. And Reaper is one of those things that can host a plugin like that. So yeah, there you go. And of course, there's other possibilities of things that you can add, like you can add a drum sequencer, and these things are all pre-built. And that's one of the advantages of like working with a system where there's actually a library of pre-existing functions, because then you don't have to build all this stuff. Okay, and then we can add filters or whatever, right? So yeah, there you go. And lots of possibilities there. Okay, and let's get back to our presentation. Automatism, and we'll play that. It's here. And I did this particular video just in one day, just throwing things together. And yeah, this is another way, similarly, of making larger functions within PD that you can just use in the library and then reuse. So here you got a whole 303 in there. You don't have to build it yourself. You just plop it in there and you're good to go. Okay, great. All right, and let's see here. So you might not know, but Unity actually has visual scripting in it. It's supported since the last year or so. One of our grads, Mark Berg, who actually is working in electronic arts, did some great work with this. And yeah, there's lots of possibilities here. So with this, it shows this patch. It shows you get a keyboard input, so like the space, you hit the space down. And then the next thing here is that there's an audio source. It plays this particular sound, which is, like a footstep sound. And then we also say that, okay, yep, we want to show on the debug to say like, hey, footsteps been hit. Great. And that goes out to the debug log so that we can see that it's played. So it's a very simple patch, just demonstrating how you could use visual scripting in Unity. One of the things you often want to do with visual scripting is to try to hide complexity. So this is something that's being worked on with Unreal and with metasounds, and they're going to start making more interfaces and more library objects to encapsulate the complexity of things. So you don't have to necessarily rebuild like your own random container all the time. You'll actually have a nice graphic interface for that. Or if you're going to do certain basic types of adaptive or interactive music, then you'll also have like, pre-built chunks for that you can use. So at the top level, you have the interface. This is showing Reactor, and you've got, like the laser base. There's like nice graphics and nodes and knobs and, sliders, all that kind of stuff. Nice graphics. It's nicely laid out. It makes you want to use it, okay? And then sort of the layer below that is sort of like light scripting. So we can see that that's using like libraries and high-level scripting. And that would be something like I showed you on automatism. Sorry, like I showed you with plug data, like with the guitar. And that's where you can just plop in larger modules. Then you can get more detailed with low-level scripting. And that's like where you're using atomic, like, sort of the more basic objects like the DAC and stuff like that. And then what you can also do is, if you're a programmer, is that you can program C or C++ code, optimize it, and make your own nodes. And within Unreal, this isn't too difficult. Then below that, there's also the hardware sound driver too. So that's written in C and C++. Okay, sometimes in assembly, I guess. So what I've been talking about earlier is this idea of visual scripting libraries. And so the neat thing there is that you can organize commonly used functions and then reuse them and share them. And so you can, one of the things that Native Instruments has done with Reactor is taken user patches, and the ones that are the best, they actually put those into being official patches, and then those ones get supported, because often people will make a patch and that's fun, but who wants to support it over all sorts of different, like, changes over different versions, when the user interface changes or whatever, like maybe the core objects change, it needs to be remade. Like I had to do that when I was working with Unreal Engine 5.1, and I made a bunch of stuff in metasounds, and then metasounds totally changed into the current version of 5.4.2. I guess that'll somewhat date this video, but anyways, yeah, and that process of maintenance is actually super important. And it would be nice to have an ease of use similar to GitHub. So GitHub is just a way of, putting open source code up and having people see it, download it, and easily recompile it for their own use and to be able to learn from it. So there's the snippet repository, as I show on the right-hand side here. And then if you use commercial solutions like Sugi Studio GameSynth, they have a whole library of all these procedural audio sounds, and there's going to be a presentation on that in AirCon as well that you should definitely check out. Another place that you can get patches from for Pure Data and other visual scripting systems is on patch storage. So yes, that is super important, because like similar to GitHub, like there's no reason to like reinvent the wheel. Oftentimes it's just better to reuse existing code bases. So what are the advantages of using visual scripting? So the things that I really like you can see there, and this is, Unity visual scripting, is that it's just, I like to think visually. I'm a visual thinker. And so that means that non-coders, I think, a lot of the times there's more of an in for them to implement behaviors and actually have more control over their interactive audio systems than they would normally have. It allows for real-time coding and changing things interactively. It's kind of like jamming with the system, like I showed you with when I was making that little patch, like in plug data. And as you change things, you hear the result immediately. You don't have to hit compile, right? And you can hide the complexity into layers, so like similar to Reactor and other systems. And even with PD, you can use this thing called graph on parent that allows you to make a nice interface and hide all the details. So it's like the front panel of the synthesizer, and you don't have to look at all the soldering and wires and stuff underneath there. One of the things that I've really liked about using PD is that I can load in patches that I did like 20 years ago and they still work, right? Another advantage is that syntax errors are less problematic. So like if you hit like, a semicolon like in the wrong spot or something like that, you're not going to be like super penalized for it, when using PD. And also even with metasounds, you can just sort of jam stuff into each other. And, over time, UE5 has done really well with showing really good errors and being able to quickly figure things out, even when you do have an issue with visual scripting. And yes, when open source, it allows you to learn from others. I've learned a lot from Martin Brinkman and to collaborate as well. So some of the challenges are, yes, look at that patch. Like, yeah, that's a metasound patch that I made, and it's fairly basic, but you can see that I should modularize that and break it into chunks. So it can be like a mess of like, visual spaghetti, and it is code. Like you need to figure out how to use like, principles like reuse and encapsulation and other, actual computer science kind of approaches or techniques over time. But at the beginning, I think it's still fine to just like throw stuff together and see what works. And then also you can see that there's so many little wires here, similar to like doing a lot of soldering. You can kind of like, get your, this is something I've talked about with other people that do a lot of PD, is that, moving the mouse around, you can get sort of RSI-ish, like hurt your hand basically by all this patching. And also visual scripting tends to be slower than using C or a compiled language. Another thing is that, yes, you have an advantage of the artists, being sound artists, being able to add stuff, but then they can also break the code. So sometimes, especially with larger projects, it's good to have like a coder or a technical audio artist like look at the patches, and they're the people that make sure that it doesn't actually cause like really big problems with the game. Another thing that I found, although you can do this in Unreal, is that you can diff, like say blueprints, is that in general it's kind of hard because it just is not it's not kind of structured the same way as say like a C code or C++ code is. And once again, yeah, no GitHub for visual scripting yet, unfortunately. So I want to show you some examples that I've done. This is an Unreal, Forgotten Robots. And so what I did is a collection of just patches that I made basically over the span of like sort of 1/2 days. And this was a couple years ago. And I wanted to really learn more about UE5 and to make interactive sort of little artworks, I guess. And so this was, November is really meant to just be a way of collaborating with the community, making things that are based in nodes. And so I did both the graphics and, well, I guess you could say graphics and the sound, but then also the interactive sort of, visual scripting that would communicate both ways between the two. And so yeah, I use blueprints, metasounds. Here I'm using particles as well, and yeah, they're reactive to each other. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so what's the future that we can see for visual scripting? I think it would be really cool to add plug data to UE5. You know, if they're going to add like a clap plugin, can't be that hard. Same thing for Fmod. Why not? Yes, I know that you need to make these things compile and these plugins work with, like, you know, especially if you're using PlayStation 5 or PlayStation 15 or whatever it's going to be. Yes, but the neat thing about plug data is that it's open source. So it can actually be recompiled from the ground up and work for those systems. Same thing, of course, for the visual scripting code, which would be, you know, like open source. And so I think this would be great. I don't think like I'm necessarily the person to do it, but yeah, hopefully somebody out there, you know, will be interested in doing this. I think it would be neat to have more visual scripting systems that combine text. So you have like a object that actually like a node that you can put text into. And sometimes visual scripting is not so great at certain operations, whereas text scripting is. And within PD, there's a system that I didn't show you called Ophelia that it uses Lua, and you can put Lua script into nodes, which is kind of cool. And I'm sure that you can do that, say, with Max MSP as well. Um, so yeah, that would be nice. Doing VR visual scripting. So like here on the right, we can see that you can connect these various modules that are all built in metasounds to create music in Fortnite. And so, yeah, yes, it is a third person, you know, view at this point, but you could also just make it first person and do VR and do visual scripting, you know, like within a game or whatever. I think that'd be neat. I would like to see like the power of large language models being used to help out when one's learning visual scripting. So to basically do a co-pilot or scripting assist where it just auto-completes or gives suggestions on how to improve things. Also, of course, help out with debugging, maybe even fix bugs for you. Like, you know, that kind of stuff is all possible these days using large language models and you know, machine learning, let's say, like with script-based coding. And then another nice to have would basically be to have an auto translate between different scripting languages. It would be neat to just have a pure data patch and then go like, you know, feed it to a system and have it spit out like a metasound or, you know, metasound plus blueprint. And of course, yeah, like having better debugging for blueprints and metasounds as they work together would be great. And that's already something that's going to happen quite soon. So yeah, questions. And I guess what I'll do is I'll switch over. Hopefully we can get the, as we see this live, we'll switch over to Zoom, I think. And I should be on that channel and you can ask me stuff there. But, with this also being a recorded video, yeah, here's the way to ask me questions is just to email me at the school. So the email is at the top of sovga.com and I answer that email. And then also my personal website is videogameaudio.com and probably it's best just to, yeah, use the email that's at the bottom of videogameaudio.com to get in touch with me.
And thank you so much, Leonard, for the talk. That was absolutely excellent. Really, really enjoyed it. So we've got a couple of questions from the audience, and I just want to say as well, please go ahead and shoot away with your questions. Now is the time. So we had Altered Waves asked, would you classify it as more high risk, high reward? I guess this was in terms. Sorry, I need to check where this comment was because I think it was. Oh, maybe I copied the wrong one. That's my bad. So we'll go with the next one. I've just finished an advanced sound design course at university focused on Reactor. What will be the next step to dive into for either audio synthesis or game audio?
Gosh, well, I would say, yeah, I'd probably put it at like Unreal 5 is probably the way to go. Just start small. A lot of the stuff is like transferable. So, like you hopefully saw in the video that there's a lot of similarities between Reactor and with in blueprints and with metasounds. And yeah, I would say that is if you're on the experimental side and sort of wanting to really get into things, and also pure data or plug data is also a way to go. I think both of those are good too. As far as if you're interested in sort of digging into sort of weird DAW stuff, with sort of visual scripting slash DSP graph kind of thing, then also I guess Bidule is kind of a cool one to try out. So there's the grid for that. So you can do that one. Gosh, there's I would sort of recommend that. And like Reactor is like crazy deep. I used it on NBA Jam 10K for the on fire sound. So I basically had this filter that was just like sort of burbling the all the music, and I created that in Reactor for that, and just it was a dynamic effect that yeah, it ended up working pretty good for the game. So you can even use Reactor sort of in a like in a non-interactive way for games too. So yeah, cool question. Thanks.
Yeah, that's really impressive. I mean, I think it's quite interesting because I personally come more from a like field recording background. I was never that good at synthesis, but this is like 6 steps beyond, and it's crazy to see how deep it goes and all the things you can do. It's really incredible. Um, Bitwig's Grid. Oh, that sounds like a great suggestion as well from someone in the comments. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
do you have experience with that by any chance?
Not that much. I'm honestly trying to like narrow down the amount of things that I work on. So for
Mhm.
me, I've sort of stayed with Unreal 5, and then for on the DAW side of things, I've been using Reaper, which is stupid deep, as everybody knows. So with that, I haven't even really gotten into scripting with it. So yeah, I'm just sort of staying focused personally. But I've heard from other composers, especially, that they've been using it and had yeah, good times with the grid, as it were. So yeah.
Yeah, we have a talk by Jamie Molloy in the Aircon Vault about using Bitwig for sound design. So I think if anyone's interested, dive into the vault and check that out. And we've got a question from Spinosound. How similar is the visual scripting of UE5, Unity, and Pure Data? Is there major differences between them?
Yeah, I think that I kind of like the way that Unreal has sort of split apart the audio rate stuff with the control rate stuff between blueprints and metasounds. I do like that. So that's sort of a major difference, I think, because Unity doesn't do audio rate stuff. It's just all control rate. One of the nice things that you can do with Unity is I think you can. I have to try it, but you should be able to integrate Fmod with it. You might also be able to do Wise with it. I'm not sure if they've wrapped their objects in the visual scripting nodes or not. So yeah, there's that. And then as far as PD, yeah, I sort of use PD more for art stuff. So yeah, that I've used a little bit for games, as you can see in the tanks demo. But yeah, I still have to get back into it. Basically, what was happening is that I was working on the tanks demo and like, hey, I've got everything working in synthesis, and then like metasounds came along, and then as you can see, like with the weird stuff that I created with that, I like the comments. that I really just sort of got lost in working with metasounds because, I mean, that's, you want to have that, they've optimized everything. So that's the thing. If you want to put like PD into something, then you got to also figure out how to optimize it for the platform. But it would be cool if that could happen. I mean, it's all open source with plug data. It's like literally ready to be like plugged in there. So yeah, if UE5 opens up sort of like a clap, plug-in possibility, then you could do it there, or even within Wise. I mean, maybe I could nudge them to maybe do that because it would be cool to see some visual scripting stuff, or DSP stuff, I guess more so in Wise. Maybe some Logic stuff too. So yeah.
That would actually be really cool. Maybe one for Damien. I believe Alan and him are doing a demo tomorrow, so might shoot that as a question.
Yeah.
Any visual scripting DSP stuff?
Yeah, no, I just saw Damien a few days ago, so
Oh, okay, okay, all right,
but I didn't lean on him for that. It was just sort of just basic hanging out. So
all
yeah.
right. Well, we can create some public pressure.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly it.
We've got
The air
another. Sorry. Yeah, go
no,
ahead.
no, no, I'm just saying it's like the force of the air wiggles. It
Exactly.
becomes like eventually like a deafening tornado, like
Yeah, yeah. If there's enough people who want it, I mean, anything can happen, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
totally.
Eric Morales asked, did metasounds patches take over metasounds presets in the new 5.4.2 update?
5.4.2 update that they over. Well, I think the thing is that as far as I know that yeah, sure. Maybe the way that it was done was kind of a little bit strange, but as I remember it, the presets is just sort of like making a template, whereas using Metasound source is more like the actual sort of, like it's kind of like that's like the instance that you're going to be using. I could be wrong about that. I'm not so good with, you know, the terminology because anyways, I haven't, not so good with the names, but once I get into it, I know it. So sorry if I don't know that precisely, but that's as I understand it, is that the presets were meant to be like templates, and then you sort of use those to build other things. So yeah.
That makes sense. Um, Ryan asks, have you come across or read Andy Farnell's book about pure data? I think it's called Designing Sounds. I'm trying to get into that, but I can't
Yes.
seem to get great sounding results following the book yet.
Okay, so yes, I know Andy sort of, fairly well. I've hung out with him a few times. That was when the AES game audio was happening in London. So he's based in the UK, and he was teaching for a long time. I'm not sure if he's teaching these days, but that book is a compilation of all these great kind of like visual scripting slash DSP stuff that was accumulated by sort of the community over time, and he was really good at putting a lot of those together and making them work and putting them all in one spot. So he's a great sort of librarian, but also he's very brilliant too. He created a lot of those himself as well. So but yeah, the book is super deep, and I think one of the things with that book that's difficult is that they're kind of like recipes, but they're the kind of recipes where you need to sort of add a little bit of salt and pepper here and there, and so he doesn't add a lot of effects. So I found that when I add like effects, like the sort of typical kind of like like compression is an easy one to add. Just to basically push the level up, make it a little bit more sort of gnarly. You can do like wave folding, obviously reverb. So a lot of the patches that he supplies are really dry. But once you use them with some effects and also in combination with each other, then they work quite well. So yeah, I would say that is, it's sort of like it's a spot to start out from, and then spending more time with it, then you can kind of get better with it. And also a huge part of it, which I didn't really get like until I really spent some time with it, is that they're meant to be used interactively. So similar to like granulation, which I didn't talk about in this one so much, but that's also one of my like things that I've worked on for a while, is that it's not just the process itself, it's how you drive it. So that interactive process of getting the parameters, sometimes multiple parameters that are being driven by the game and being fed into those systems, are really what makes those things come alive. So yeah, that's another thing too that I found, and quite honestly, yeah, some of them they just don't sound that good, and that's kind of okay too. It's meant as a bit of a starting point. So yeah, I hear you that you know they do have they lack sometimes a little bit of life if you just use the literally like plain vanilla version to start out with.
Nice. That's some good advice there. So add some spice. um,
Exactly.
we've got Helen Lynch in the chat. Excellent. So she'll be hosting the panel with Damien tomorrow. So we'll get some questions in there. Um, Max Chen asks, for someone who is more familiar with written code, where do you think a good place to start learning visual scripting would be?
Oh, that is interesting. Huh. Well, actually, I had a student that she was really great at coding. This is Min, and she came to us through the Game Audio Diversity Alliance, and she had a lot of programming skills to begin with. And it's what she did is actually create her own nodes in UE5, and then experimented with those. So it's kind of like a little bit sort of like bottom up, and using your coding skills to be like, oh hey, I can do all this stuff like fairly easily, but maybe I want to use this chunk like where I've got like points to interface into, or you want to like hand that off to somebody else and have them try it out. But during that process, because worked in audio tools, a lot of it is figuring out sort of that feedback, creative feedback process. And I think that could be a way to go. But also another thing is just, to dive into metasounds and all your sort of knowledge working with logical structures and just thought will translate fairly well over to blueprints especially. And yeah, you should be fine there too. But yeah, creating creating some new nodes I think would be cool. And Aaron McLaren, one of the main coders at Epic, has done some great tutorials on how to do that. And you could also look up Min's. She has a GitHub as well. Sorry, I don't know the the link offhand, but if you send me an email, if you just go to sovga.com, my email's at the top there. So it's info@sovga.com. You can ask me directly, and I can get back to you. I think that was in the presentation too. So and also I provided the presentation notes. There's a whole bunch of links in there. Like a lot of that stuff was like hot links, so you can just like click on that and get to all that great stuff. Like Martin Brinkman's patches for PD are super deep, and so highly recommend looking at that if you're at all interested in PD. And of course, plug data is like huge too. Really recommend playing around with that. It's yeah. I gave it a little bit of a strange example using it in Reaper, but with a bit of work, it could fit into like a game engine, definitely.
That's really cool. I wanted to ask a question myself, actually.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, two different ones. So the first one, I hope I can remember both of them by the end. The first one is, I'm really curious because, as I said, so I work as a sound designer by day, and I heavily rely on libraries and source and recordings. However, I also use synthesis more in the traditional sense for creating source, but I have used things for basically also in engine, very basic stuff. But I'm really curious to hear, where do you think kind of all the visual scripting tools fit into the workflow, and where are their strengths? One of the applications that comes to mind potentially is like vehicle sound design, but I'm just really curious to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, for the amount of time I've been working on it, I think one of the big things is prototyping. So it's not even stuff that necessarily makes it into the game. It's actually you just being able to try stuff out that would be connected with the game. And you could use OSC to actually talk to the engine and hear back from the engine, same as that Tanks project in Unity. And you could also use, like custom tools, like especially if the company has their own engine or whatever, you could just, adding OSC is actually super easy. So that's one approach, is that you wouldn't necessarily, and that's kind of sort of the easiest way to start out with, because then you can create all this weird stuff, but then you don't have to think about optimizing it at all, which is something that, like most developers are just like, hey, yeah, haha, yeah, that's never going to make it into the game because it's like too slow, blah, blah, blah. So yes, I understand that. And that's also a part of, it's funny that like my education side of that, like where I was trying to build my own like whys, basically, that's where I got started with really sort of connecting the two as well. But I think one of the, yeah, sure, you could definitely use it for like things that require a lot of prototyping and really, trying out different behaviors where things have a lot of parameters. So vehicle sounds, crowd engines, sort of like physics engine type stuff, like, skid, slide, turn, kind of like, where you have like physics things that are happening that you really want to bend the sound around the action, and the action might be doing all sorts of stuff. Whereas, like sort of where samples are good is where like the interaction, what's going to happen. And so you can paste a, static sample on top of that, like I was saying in the presentation. So I think it's important, even though I might have shown a lot of synthesis stuff, that you want to really use an effective balance of the two. So another thing that I think would be helpful is if you already have a system running like metasounds, and it's already performant and all that. I think one of the areas that visual scripting really shines is like feedback, like I showed in that sort of the alien one, where it's just like, and it's got all these things going up and down. It was sort of the sort of orange kind of distortion-y and all that kind of stuff. I think that it's neat because what feedback does is the same using like guitar or something like that. It actually the the way the sound will change is highly dependent on very small. It's kind of like the butterfly, effect, where very small changes produce like large, results, like basically chaos. And so when you have synthesis and visual scripting like that, you can get these things like, like that sound that particular piece was making. I had no idea when I started it. I was just like, oh, hey, let's try out some feedback. And then it was making these crazy things. And so I was just like, that's awesome. And of course, if you can't put that live into the game, that's fine. You could flatten it out and do the same thing like you do with your analog synths, right? So then you can just cut that stuff up and then like paste it in there as samples. And that's fine too. But if you can use it live, then, where it's actually being performed by the game, then you might actually come up with stuff, that is totally unique, depending on, what happened, the combination of all those parameters in the game. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's one of the strengths as well. I just like being able to iterate on stuff quickly using visual scripting as well. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
I think it's really interesting as well with the examples you showed, and especially kind of like the things that are data driven from somewhere else, as you say, through animations or things like that. And that kind of reminds me as well, kind of stepping out of the realm of game audio, things like installations where art and audio kind of are crossed over and inform each other and stuff like that. And yeah, that's really interesting. We've got another question from Altered Waves. How relevant is a deep understanding of DSP to visual scripting, meaning beyond the basics we might have as an audio designer in general?
Oh, I think it's one of those things. The more you know, it'll help you. But also with visual scripting and with doing DSP graphs and stuff, you'll just naturally learn more about DSP as you do stuff, because then you're just like, one of the basic things that like that I found, like, years ago at this point, not recently, but one of the things that I found just with experimenting is like when you have a control rate signal, like a signal that's only changing 100 times a second, and then you're volume ramping something, then you get that zipper effect. And I was kind of like, huh, that's kind of weird. Like, and so just experimenting with those things is a great way to learn about like how DSP works. You just get a better understanding by experimentation. So I don't think you need to know a lot of DSP before, but I think if you're into it, then you'll just naturally want to learn more stuff. And the Designing Sound book by Andrew Farnell is amazing for being some background for that. Another one book that I don't have the latest edition for is the Computer Music Tutorial by Curtis Rhodes, which is like it's like this huge like book from MIT, and it's awesome though because it's got all this history and stuff, and it it goes to MIDI, but then it goes like deep into like DSP stuff, and anytime I want to feel inspired, I sort of crack that one open and have a look. But yeah, and also just with experimentation, you might discover something new. That's how a lot of like new synthesizers that are being put out. There's like just different sort of twists on existing themes. So you know, sometimes not being stuck within the bounds of what you think is proper DSP actually might be a good thing.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's definitely interesting to think about as well. And I still have my second question in my head, so I'll ask it before it floats away. And that is, I remember distinctly picking up that book in my university library from um, Andrew Farnell, so Andy Farnell, and the Designing Sound one, and I kind of like reading through it and seeing all these patches and just being like very overwhelmed, but at the same time completely fascinated by the fact that you can essentially break down these physics interactions in the real world into these kind of very mathematical equations that then produce sound waves that sound similar to this thing that is in the real world. So I wanted to ask how much, um, it's a weird question, I guess, to format, but how much has this knowledge of visual scripting and creating these patches helped you in understanding sound, and also adjacent to that, um, how much do you rely on kind of breaking down the physical process to figure out creating a totally new patch, like say a gunshot, which is not a, I mean, of course, with the white noise and stuff, but maybe something more complicated, maybe like some Burke calls, or something like that. How much do you look at the real thing and then try and model it, or I guess fake it?
Yeah. Years ago, probably like his, yeah, like even before Andy's book, Andy Furnell, sorry, that he had this website called Obi Wannabe, and I think you have to look on archive.org now to find it, like in the Wayback Machine. But he would come up with stuff and like in the PD groups, and he was super active on that. So I was like, like digesting that stuff at the time, and I was same thing for me. It was just like inconceivable. It was just some of the stuff I didn't understand how like those kind of detailed sounds came out of basically like math. It took more time, and even still, a lot of the stuff I still don't understand. So I still got to go through the patches. But I think for me, the thing that I've sort of gone a little bit full circle, where I understand a little bit more why some people go like, oh, it's like synthesis, and like, yeah, sure, you can do it like procedural audio, but it doesn't sound that good. And I think for me, I was trying to be like, no, 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 like everything like da 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 da, and like, and no, it doesn't honestly sound as good a lot of the time. But sometimes the aesthetics of the game actually fit, like working in procedural audio. Then that makes sense. And also, a lot of the times, same as using synthesis layers, like for low end sweeteners and whatnot, those are not natural sounds. And like those, so you don't necessarily have to use the procedural stuff just on its own. I think it can be used really well with samples too. So yeah, I've learned a lot myself about how synthesis works from doing visual scripting and doing DSP stuff. But I also learned a lot about synthesis from just basic synthesis. So there's a game, indie game that I worked on called Retro City Rampage, and I did all the sound effects using the Nintendo Entertainment System sound spec. So all of those sounds are done like with basic waveforms and a really crappy sampled sound channel. And we stayed by the limitations of that system, like fairly closely. But that was like a way that like when I hear certain things, I'm like, oh, yeah, I could just basically just use like a low bitrate sampled noise, and that would get 90% of the way there, and then I could add a little bit of something, a sample over top, and then yeah, that'll sound good. Um, yeah, so that has also informed a lot of my work with synthesis too. So yeah.
That's awesome. Um, yeah, maybe I'll pick up that book again someday. Right. I think that's it as well for questions. In that case, I think we can wrap it here. Thank you so much, Leonard, for your time and for the fantastic talk. And yeah, if people want to find out more about you, you teach amazing courses at School of Video Game Audio. So I'm gonna throw a link in. It's let's see, into the chat, because we can do that if I find the window. There it is. All right, so definitely check out the School of Video Game Audio to learn about a lot of different things, technical sound design based, including Unreal Engine and Wise. And I think you do pure data stuff as well, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird thing, but so there's PD and FMOD and Unity are 5 full courses, and yeah, we go like deep into the weeds. So some of those weird things that I played in the presentation, I don't know. I think it's important to sort of do weird stuff, because then you find out sort of where the edge is. It's nice enough to get paid for games, but sometimes also doing the art stuff is like fun too. So that was the reason why I added PD, because I do some like basically like audio arts and installation stuff on the side as well. So yeah, no, it'd be great to hear more questions. If people have questions about the school and whatnot, that's great. And of course, thank you so much to Airwiggles, yourself. This is yeah, it's an amazing resource, and to have it for free is just, I think I've been doing this a while, and like having a resource like this for people that are just coming into it, and they're just like, oh yeah, Airwiggles is just like, no, my friend, like this is never something that you should like expect or take for granted. Like this takes a massive amount of work. So like basically a huge debt of thanks from the community to y'all. So thank you so much for putting on this. This is really awesome, literally awesome. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. And yeah, wouldn't be possible without yourself and the amazing speakers and all the community for coming. So yeah, thank you everyone for tuning in. It was awesome. And yeah, please, if you have any questions, email Leonard. Check out School of Video Game Audio, and I will see you for more talks tomorrow or today if you're in Europe, like me.
Nice.
So I'm gonna get some sleep now.
Yes, awesome. Okay, thank you so much.
Take
Okay.
care. It was an absolute
Cheers.
pleasure.